Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I always thought betrayal would come from a stranger, someone outside the bloodlines that tied you to promises and Christmas cards and forced smiles across dinner tables. I never imagined it would come from the one person who watched me grow teeth, cry over scraped knees, and dream under the same leaky roof year after year. My mother once told me that she loved us equally, me and Lily, but if love were measured by actions instead of hollow words, then the scales in our house were permanently tilted in my sister's favor. I found out on a regular Tuesday, as stupid and plain as any other Tuesday could be. I had stopped by my parents' house after work, still in my navy scrubs, shoes sticking slightly to the kitchen floor that my mom had mopped but left soaking wet like always. Barbara, my mother, stood by the sink, her phone balanced on her shoulder, nodding and humming some affirmation to whoever was on the other end of the line. She barely looked up when I came in. I should have known something was wrong when she didn't pounce immediately to ask me about my dating life or my non-existent wedding plans, but instead gave me that distracted wave people reserve for Jehovah's Witnesses at the door. I grabbed a glass of water, the air in the kitchen thick with that weird lemon pine smell of cheap floor cleaner. It wasn't until I heard her say the words, clear as a damn church bell, that my stomach dropped. Yes, yes, she'll love it. Paris is the ultimate proposal after all. No, don't worry about the money. Lily deserves the best. I'm covering it. From Emma's wedding fund. I dropped the glass. It hit the edge of the counter first, spinning wildly before shattering across the floor into a million tiny betrayals. My mother turned, startled, the color draining from her face, but not fast enough to erase the guilt I saw flicker there. What the hell, Mom? My voice cracked halfway through because anger and heartbreak are close cousins and they like to arrive holding hands. Barbara clicked her tongue, like I was being dramatic, like I was making a scene over a piece of gum stuck to my shoe. Emma, relax, she said, waving a damp dish towel like she could just wipe this conversation away. You're not even engaged. Lily's boyfriend has a whole plan. Paris, a photographer, a boat ride on the Seine. It's going to be magical. She deserves it more. I swear I felt something inside me crack just a little. Not like a bone-breaking clean, but like a hairline fracture deep in the foundation. The kind you don't see until the whole house comes crumbling down later. The wedding fund wasn't just some piggy bank we toss spare change into for fun. It was built on sacrifice. Every birthday where I got a homemade cake instead of a trip to Disneyland. Every Christmas where I got socks instead of a new bike. All the little no's stacked up into one big yes for the day I would finally get to walk down the aisle in a dress that didn't come from a clearance rack. And now it was gone. Gifted to Lily because she had found someone faster, someone ready to pop a question on a bridge in Paris while violinists played some sappy Edith Piaf song in the background. I imagined her there, hair perfectly curled, eyes wide and fake surprised, as some dude dropped to one knee under a sky that wasn't even ours. You saved that money for me, I said, every word tasting like blood and pennies. You promised. Barbara shrugged, the way people shrug off parking tickets or bad weather. You'll find someone, Emma. But Lily, well, this is her time. She's always been the romantic one. That was it. No apology. No shame. Just a decision made without me, about me, leaving me standing there like an idiot in my scrub pants and two-day-old ponytail, watching the future I thought I might still have get flushed down the goddamn drain. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked out. My sneakers squeaked wetly across the sticky floor, and I let the door slam behind me, rattling the cheap picture frames that lined the hallway. Driving home, the freeway lights blurred into angry yellow lines, and the radio spat out country songs about heartbreak that felt too close, too real, too soon. I pulled into my apartment complex and just sat there in the dark, hands numb on the steering wheel, replaying the whole thing over and over like a bad home movie. How long had it been like this? How many times had they chosen her, lifted her up while telling me to be patient, to wait my turn to understand? And what did it mean that I had understood for so long? Maybe it was my fault too. Maybe I had made it too easy to put me second. As I sat there, the glow of the street lamps casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt, a thought snuck in, sharp and unwelcome. Maybe I was never meant to be first. Maybe I was just the backup plan. But let me ask you something, right here, right now, have you ever been blindsided like that by someone you loved? Have you ever been told without words that your dreams were worthless? If you have, tell me in the comments, because I swear to God, that kind of betrayal rewires your brain. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I didn't even throw my phone across the room like some dramatic TV character. I just sat there until the engine ticked itself to sleep and the street outside fell quiet and my heart hardened into something colder and sharper than it had ever been before. That night, for the first time in my life, I stopped hoping. I stopped waiting for my turn. And as I lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling that looked a hell of a lot like the cracks in my life, one question burned itself into my brain so deeply I could practically hear it pulsing in the silence. Was I ever going to be enough? Growing up, there was always this invisible scoreboard hanging above our heads, blinking red numbers that only my mother seemed able to see, and no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, Lily was always ahead by 10 points. Smiling that easy smile that said she belonged exactly where she was at the top. I used to tell myself it was just my imagination, just kid stuff, but kids are sharper than people give them credit for, and I knew, somewhere deep in my little ribcage, that the love in our house had favorites. Lily was born 3 years after me, and somehow even as a screaming, colicky baby, she managed to be adorable doing it, while I had spent my baby years being described as serious and quiet, like it was some kind of affliction they hoped I would grow out of. From the very beginning, she was the golden child, the one with the dimpled smile and the naturally bouncy hair, and the way of tilting her head just so that made adults chuckle and slip her extra candy from their pockets. Meanwhile, I was the girl who read books too fast, who needed glasses by 2nd grade, who teachers said was bright but a little distant. I remember one Christmas vividly, not because of what I got, but because of what I did not. I was about 8 years old, still naive enough to think magic was real and that Santa knew who had been good all year. I asked for a blue bike with tassels on the handlebars, had circled it in the Sears catalog, and left it out for my mom to find, along with notes and sticky reminders like a little campaign. Christmas morning came, and under the tree sat a pink bike, not the sleek blue one I wanted, but one Lily had offhandedly mentioned liking months before. She was only 5, too small for it, but my mother beamed as she helped her up onto the seat, and I stood there holding a set of books on famous women in history, which, in hindsight, felt more like a consolation prize than an actual gift. You see, Lily did not even have to try. She coasted through life with that effortless charm, the kind that makes teachers forgive missing homework and strangers offer you the last cookie. I clawed for every scrap of recognition, every good job thrown at me like a bone to a starving dog, and still it never measured up. When Lily brought home a painting from kindergarten, 3 blobs that could have been anything, it got framed and hung in the hallway. When I won the regional spelling bee in 5th grade, the picture stayed stuck with a magnet on the side of the fridge, half covered by grocery lists. Tell me something, folks. Have you ever been slapped in the face by someone you trusted the most? If yes, drop a comment because damn, this one stung, and it kept stinging every time life handed me another 2nd place trophy for a race I never even agreed to run. High school widened the gap instead of closing it. I studied late into the night, memorizing dates and formulas, while Lily got invited to every party, floated onto every homecoming court, and somehow managed to graduate with teachers calling her a joy to have in class, even though she spent more time in the parking lot sneaking cigarettes than inside actually learning anything. I saved babysitting money for my own car, a dented, rusty Honda Civic with a back bumper that threatened to fall off every time I hit a pothole, while Lily got a shiny new Volkswagen for her 16th birthday. complete with a big red bow on the hood like we were starring in some cheesy holiday commercial. College was never even a question for me. I got scholarships, busted my ass to pay what they did not cover, and took every soul-sucking campus job that offered minimum wage and free coffee. Lily, on the other hand, decided college was too stressful, backpacked around Europe for a year on my parents' dime, and came back tanner, thinner, and even more beloved for her brave spirit of adventure. Sometimes, when I looked at her across the dinner table, laughing at some dumb joke my dad repeated for the 5th time, I could not tell if I wanted to scream or just slip away quietly, the way a ghost might realize it had been dead for years without noticing. It was not that I hated Lily, at least not in the sharp, bitter way people imagine hatred feels. No, it was more complicated than that, more painful. It was like loving someone with a splinter under your skin. Every time they brushed against you, it hurt, and yet you could not bring yourself to pull away because part of you still hoped maybe one day it would stop hurting. When the wedding fund was first mentioned, it had seemed like a peace offering, a long overdue acknowledgement that my life mattered too. My mother had started setting money aside when I was about 20, after a long, teary conversation about feeling unseen, about being tired of always being the one who understood while others were celebrated. It had felt monumental at the time, a real promise stitched into the fabric of our family's future. But like everything else, it turned out to be conditional. I had been foolish enough to believe that love, once given, could not be repossessed like a cheap piece of furniture when someone flashier walked through the door. After hearing what my mother did, handing over my dreams for the sake of a Paris Instagram proposal, the anger sat thick and ugly in my gut, but I kept it hidden under layers of politeness, because rage, I had learned, made people uncomfortable, and God forbid I be the one to cause discomfort. I smiled at work, nodded at friends' engagements, liked Lily's stupid travel photos with the Eiffel Tower in the background, all while my chest burned with the kind of quiet fury that can melt steel if you hold onto it long enough. The thing about always being second is that you get good at swallowing your pride until you can almost pretend you do not taste the bile anymore. Almost. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I did not care. But late at night, lying awake while the city hummed and buzzed outside my window, I knew the truth. I cared more than I ever wanted to admit. And for the first time in my life, I decided I was done waiting for recognition, done begging for scraps at the table of people who never intended to feed me properly. This time, I was going to serve myself. There is a kind of rage that demands noise, demands plates thrown across the kitchen or doors slammed so hard they rattle the pictures on the walls, but mine was a quieter kind, a slow, seething thing that made my blood throb under my skin and my jaw ache from clenching it too tight. After the betrayal with the wedding fund, after realizing that once again I had been weighed against Lily and found lacking, I decided that the only thing I could control anymore was my presence, and I chose to make it as rare and as valuable as gold. At first, my mother called, pretending like nothing had happened, leaving voicemails that chirped about family dinners and updates on Lily's Paris engagement, as if I had not been gutted like a fish only a week before. I did not answer. I texted back once, clipped busy with work, and left it at that, feeling a dark satisfaction bloom low in my chest when the messages slowed and eventually stopped. I skipped Sunday lunches, ignored cousin baby showers, and when Lily sent out invites to her engagement party, all pastel pink and gold with tiny Eiffel Towers embossed along the sides, I deleted it without even opening it. Some of my friends, the ones who had heard the story and watched me barely hold it together at cheap happy hour tables, had plenty of opinions. Rachel, blunt as always, said I should march into my mother's living room and demand the money back, screaming until the walls cracked or the neighbors called the cops. Jason, ever the peacekeeper, said I should take the high road, forgive but not forget, build a life so shiny and happy they would choke on their regret. The truth was, both options felt exhausting. I had spent my whole damn life swinging between anger and resignation, between shouting into the void and pretending I didn't care, and neither had gotten me a damn thing but heartache. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to see Lily's perfect face crumple into those wide, wounded eyes she always wore when caught in someone else's crossfire. I didn't want my mother's tight-lipped guilt or my father's uncomfortable silences. I just wanted distance, and if that distance grew into a canyon too wide to ever cross again, so be it. For once, I would not be the one building the bridge. That was my plan, anyway. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Let them miss me, if they were even capable of missing what they never really saw in the first place. It might have worked, too, if life hadn't decided to shove me sideways into something bigger than myself. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those sticky, too bright days where the heat makes everything feel a little unreal, like the world is wrapped in plastic. I was sorting through a pile of junk mail in the tiny entryway of my apartment, planning to throw 90% of it straight into the trash, when I noticed a heavy cream envelope without the usual smudged ink and pizza coupons. Inside was an invitation, simple and elegant, the Carter Foundation's annual gala, benefiting children's hospitals across the state. Formal attire. RSVP by the end of the week. I blinked at it, confused. The Carters weren't related to me. Carter was my last name, too, but this was another Carter family altogether, one I only knew by reputation. Old money. Big names. Black tie events that the local newspapers drooled over every year. I had no idea why I was on their guest list. My first instinct was to assume it was a mistake, some clerical error where some assistant grabbed the wrong Emma Carter off some list. My second instinct, the one that came with a sly little thrill down my spine, was to think maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe the universe was finally offering me a seat at a table I had never been invited to before, not because I was Lily's sister or Barbara's daughter, but because of me. I tossed the rest of the mail into the trash, staring at the invitation in my hand like it might vanish if I looked away. Formal dress required. Open bar. Silent auction. Big names, big checks, big dreams. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, crawl back into the safe shell of my tiny world where expectations were low and disappointments were smaller. But another part of me, the part that had hardened in my car that night after my mother's betrayal, the part that no longer waited to be chosen, knew I had to go. Not for revenge. Not even for closure. For myself. I spent the next 2 days hunting down something suitable to wear, raiding discount racks, and finally splurging on a black dress that fit like it had been sewn onto my skin, simple and classic, with a neckline just daring enough to feel like armor instead of decoration. I borrowed heels from Rachel, brushed the dust off my one nice clutch, and practiced walking in front of my full-length mirror until I stopped wobbling like a newborn deer. The night of the gala, the air smelled like rain, thick and electric, and the city skyline glittered like a handful of broken glass scattered across the horizon. I took a cab, nerves and excitement twisting in my gut, clutching the invitation so tightly it left creases in the thick paper. As we pulled up to the hotel, a grand old place with stone lions guarding the front steps and valets in crisp uniforms snapping open car doors, I had a sudden flash of doubt. What if it was a mistake? What if they laughed at me? What if I did not belong here, any more than I belonged at those family dinners where Lily's laughter rang louder than my voice? But then the doorman smiled and ushered me inside, and I remembered the quiet promise I had made to myself: no more scraps. No more begging. If they were going to throw me into the deep end, I would damn well learn to swim. The ballroom was already filling up, a sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos, chandeliers throwing shards of light across the marble floors. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne flutes, and a string quartet tucked into one corner played something elegant and forgettable. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, feeling like an imposter but refusing to show it. My dress whispered around my legs when I moved, my heels clicking confidently across the polished floor. For once, I wasn't background noise. I was a goddamn presence. I had no idea whose life I was about to crash into that night. And even if I had, I don't think it would have changed a damn thing. The ballroom smelled faintly of expensive perfume, polished wood, and old money, the kind of scent that clung to the thick velvet curtains and gold-edged mirrors like an invisible signature nobody bothered to hide. Women glided across the gleaming marble floors in dresses that probably cost more than my car, men laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny but bought them power anyway. The chandeliers hung like frozen explosions overhead, dripping with so much crystal they made the room itself seem lighter, airier, as if gravity bowed to wealth in this place. Every detail had been manicured and shined within an inch of its life, and for the first 20 minutes, I honestly thought maybe I had made a terrible mistake by coming here at all. I hovered near the edge of the crowd, clutching a champagne flute that sweated against my fingers, trying to look busy without looking desperate. The worst part was that nobody noticed. I might as well have been a piece of furniture for all the attention anyone paid me, and for a minute, the old familiar feeling of being invisible wrapped around my ribs like a too-tight corset. It was high school dances and college formals all over again, a background character in someone else's beautiful, glittering story. I sipped my champagne too fast, feeling the bubbles burn their way up my throat, and debated how long I needed to stay before I could leave without feeling like a complete coward. 5 more minutes, I told myself, then you can bail. Go home. Crawl under your cheap fleece blanket and pretend you never thought you could stand shoulder to shoulder with people who probably owned islands they forgot about. Then, just as I was about to set my glass down and make a break for the door, I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not in a creepy, stalker-in-the-shadows kind of way, but something sharper, heavier, like a spotlight had clicked on and suddenly I was no longer just scenery. I turned slowly, not wanting to look too eager or too afraid, and that was when I saw him. He was standing by the bar, one hand resting lightly on the counter, a half-full glass of something dark and expensive-looking cradled in the other. He wore a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked casual, like he had been born in it, the jacket open just enough to show the crisp, white shirt beneath, no tie, the top 2 buttons undone. His hair was dark, but graying slightly at the temples, cut short in a way that said he did not have time for bullshit, and when our eyes met, I swear something in my chest jolted so hard, I almost dropped my glass. Nick Vaughn. Even if you did not know his name, you would know the type. Confident without trying, powerful without shouting about it, the kind of man who could buy the whole damn building and fire half the people in it before breakfast without breaking a sweat. His face was handsome. Sure, but in a lived-in way, lines at the corners of his mouth and eyes that spoke of late nights, hard decisions, and probably a few mistakes he did not regret nearly enough. He smiled then, just a little, and with terrifying ease, he started walking toward me. I had maybe 2 seconds to compose myself before he was standing right there, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something clean and understated, a million miles from the cloying clouds that hung around most of the other men in the room. "You look like you could use a better drink," he said, his voice low and warm and just rough enough around the edges to feel real in a place that otherwise felt like a wax museum. I blinked, surprised that he was speaking to me at all, even more surprised that he sounded genuine, not like he was trying to sell me something or pick me up or laugh at me. "I might," I said, setting my nearly empty glass down on a passing tray. "But I think I missed the memo on how to order anything that doesn't come with a lecture about terroir." He chuckled, a real sound, not one of those hollow social laughs people fake when they're networking. "Let me guess," he said, studying me with those sharp eyes that felt like they could see straight through the cheap dress and the borrowed shoes and into whatever fragile thing I was hiding underneath. "Not your usual crowd?" "Not even close," I admitted, because there didn't seem to be any point in lying. "Not to him. Not tonight." For a moment, we just stood there, the buzz of the gala folding around us like white noise, and it was strange how easy it felt, talking to him. Like the rules of the room didn't apply as long as I stayed within the small bubble of space he created just by existing. He bought me a real drink, bourbon, neat, strong enough to make my eyes water slightly on the first sip, and we found a quieter corner near one of the giant windows overlooking the city. The light spread out below us like 1,000 tiny promises, and for the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. Nick asked questions, real ones, not the boring surface-level stuff everyone else liked to toss around. What did I do for work? What did I actually want to do if money weren't a factor? What would I change about my life if I had the guts? At first, I answered carefully, trying not to reveal too much, but the longer we talked, the easier it became to be honest. I told him about being a nurse, about feeling invisible even in scrubs, about the constant pressure to be perfect without ever being enough. I didn't mention my family, didn't say a word about Lily or Paris or the stolen wedding fund, but somehow I felt like he already knew the shape of the hurt, even if he didn't know the details. He listened in a way most people don't anymore, without checking his phone or scanning the room for someone more important. When he laughed, it was because he found me funny, not because he was humoring me. And when he looked at me, it wasn't with pity or judgment. It was like he saw something I didn't even know I had been hiding. After about an hour, or maybe it was less, maybe it just felt longer because for once I wasn't drowning in loneliness, he set his glass down and leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "I like you, Emma," he said, and hearing my name fall from his mouth sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You're not like the rest of them." I swallowed hard, not trusting myself to say anything. "I have an offer for you," he continued, and there was something in his tone that made my stomach twist, not in fear, exactly, but in a sharp, thrilling way, like standing on the edge of a rooftop and thinking maybe, just maybe, you could fly. But he added, that smile flickering back into place, "It's not the kind of offer you'll understand right away." He didn't explain further. He just handed me a sleek black card with nothing on it but a phone number and the word Vaughn embossed in silver. "Think about it," he said, his eyes holding mine for a long moment before he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there, the card burning a hole in my hand, with no idea what the hell had just happened. Only the certainty that whatever door he had just opened, it was one I was meant to walk through. The black card stayed on my nightstand for 3 days, sitting there like a tiny dare, catching the morning light and winking at me every time I tried to ignore it. I would brush my hair, sip my lukewarm coffee, stare at my cracked phone screen, and still, out of the corner of my eye, there it was, practically humming with the possibilities it promised, but refused to explain. I told myself 100 different times that I wasn't going to call, that Nick Vaughn was probably just playing some rich man's game where poor, tired women like me were the chess pieces he slid around for fun. Still, late on the 3rd night, long after the city had gone to sleep and the silence inside my apartment was too heavy to bear, I picked up the card and dialed the number with fingers that felt strangely steady. He answered on the 2nd ring, no assistant, no robot voice, just Nick himself, sounding just as calm and unbothered as he had at the gala, as if he had been expecting my call all along. After some brief small talk, a few jokes that made me laugh despite the tight knot in my stomach, he got to the point, because Nick Vaughn was not a man who wasted time, even on charm. "I want to make you an offer," he said, the same words from that night echoing back into my ears, but now heavier, realer, like bricks being stacked into something permanent. "Meet me for coffee tomorrow. We'll talk details." And because some stupid part of me still believed in fairy tales, or maybe because the part of me that had stopped believing needed to prove it wrong, I said yes. We met at a coffee shop in the nicer part of town, the kind where the cappuccinos came with little hearts in the foam and the pastries had names I couldn't pronounce without embarrassing myself. Nick was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small corner table like he owned the place, wearing another suit that probably cost more than 3 months' rent on my shoebox apartment. He looked up when I walked in and smiled, that same devastating, effortless smile that made me feel seen, and God help me, I smiled back. He didn't waste time pretending this was a date. He didn't flirt, didn't lean in too close, or make any of the moves I had started to expect from men who thought a few compliments were the price of my attention. No, Nick got straight to the point, laying it out so plainly that I almost laughed at how surreal it sounded. "I need a partner," he said, sipping his coffee with an infuriating calm. "Someone smart, adaptable, quick on their feet. Someone not afraid to get their hands dirty." I raised an eyebrow, the skepticism practically pouring off me. "You want to hire me?" I asked, trying to figure out if this was some kind of test, or worse, a joke. In a manner of speaking, he said, and something about the way he said it made me sit up a little straighter. "It's not a normal job. You won't be filing papers or fetching coffee. This would be different." Different was an understatement, as it turned out. Nick explained, in his quiet, confident way, that he had his fingers in a lot of pies, businesses, investments, real estate deals, charity events, international ventures. And he needed someone by his side who wasn't tangled up in all the usual social games, someone who could blend into any room without causing ripples, but still think sharp when it mattered. Someone who owed nothing to the circles he moved in. Someone with no strings attached. "You're exactly what I need, Emma," he said, and the way he said my name made it sound like a promise, like he was offering me not just a job, but a new life entirely. I sat there for a long moment, the fancy heart-shaped foam in my untouched cappuccino slowly collapsing, and tried to figure out if I was being an idiot. Pride screamed at me that I didn't need rescuing, that I could find my own way out of the mess my life had become. Fear hissed that this was too risky, too good to be true, that men like Nick Vaughn didn't hand out opportunities without expecting something steep in return. But there was another voice too, smaller but stronger, buried somewhere deep in my gut. Hope. That dirty, stubborn little flicker that had survived everything else life had thrown at me. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was my shot at something bigger than survival. "You don't even know me," I said finally, hearing the doubt even in my own voice. Nick leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table, and smiled, not the dazzling public smile he wore at the gala, but something smaller, realer. "I know enough," he said. "I know you don't scare easy. I know you're smarter than you let people see. And I know you're standing at a crossroads right now, wondering if you have the guts to take the step no one else would expect." My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the clatter of cups and conversation around us. I thought about my family, about my mother's voice telling me Lily deserved more. I thought about Lily in Paris, flashing her ring on Instagram to people who had always clapped louder for her than for me. I thought about all the times I had been told to wait, to be patient, to be good. And then, without giving myself another second to talk myself out of it, I said the two words that would change everything. "I'm in." Nick's smile widened just a fraction, and he nodded like he had never doubted it for a second. "Good," he said, standing and tossing a few bills onto the table without even looking at the check. "Pack a bag. We leave tonight." I blinked, stunned, opening my mouth to ask 100 questions. Where? Why? How long? But Nick was already moving toward the door, expecting me to follow. And after one heartbeat of hesitation, I did. City Hall did not smell like flowers or fresh-baked cake or any of the things I had once imagined on the day I got married. It smelled like bleach, floor wax, and whatever cheap aftershave the man ahead of us in line had drowned himself in. There was no aisle here, no string quartet playing bittersweet music, no sea of familiar faces turned toward me with wet eyes and forced smiles. Instead, there were gray walls, a busted clock ticking just a little too loud, and a tired woman behind a laminated desk flipping through paperwork like she had better places to be. Nick stood beside me in a black suit, no tie, jacket slung casually over his arm, looking like he belonged in a place 10 times grander than this, and still somehow fitting here better than I did. He was calm, unreadable, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening slightly when he caught me sneaking a sideways glance at him. He offered me the barest hint of a smile, not a romantic one, but a steadying one, the kind of smile that said we were in this together, whatever the hell this really was. The judge, a woman with tired eyes and an efficient voice, barely looked up as she read through the vows, her tone so flat it could have been a grocery list. I repeated the words because I had to, Not because they meant anything, not because love or devotion was blooming inside me. I said them because Nick Vaughn had offered me a deal that required a signature, a name change, and a witness, and because for the first time in my life, I had decided that survival and ambition were going to come before hope and fairy tales. When the judge asked if anyone objected, a little voice in my head, the old, soft one that still dreamed of white dresses and backyard dances under twinkling lights, whimpered weakly, but no one else spoke, and the moment slid past like a coin dropped into a deep, dark well. We signed the papers with borrowed pens that leaked slightly, and just like that, I was Mrs. Emma Vaughn. There were no kisses, no cheering friends, no glass clinking against glass in some warm restaurant afterward. Nick shook my hand, firm, businesslike, and said, "Well, Mrs. Vaughn, looks like we're official." I laughed then, a sharp, strange sound that felt half crazy in my throat, because if you did not laugh at the absurdity of your own life sometimes, it would crush you where you stood. We walked out into the chilly afternoon, the air smelling like rain and car exhaust, and Nick flagged down a black town car with the same casual wave someone else might use to hail a taxi. "Ready for part 2?" he asked, sliding into the car with the easy grace of a man who had been doing this, making moves, making plays, all his life. I climbed in after him, smoothing the wrinkled skirt of my cheap but decent white dress, feeling strangely hollow and strangely powerful at the same time. I had done it. I had stepped off the map my family had drawn for me, had built something from the broken pieces they had left behind. When Nick handed me the phone, I did not ask questions. I knew exactly what he was offering me, a way to take control of the narrative, a way to slam the door in their faces without ever having to raise my voice. I tapped into my social media account, the one my mother and Lily still followed, the one I had not updated in months except to like their endless stream of perfectly curated photos. I opened the live stream option with a flick of my thumb and framed the shot carefully. The City Hall building behind me, the white dress, the marriage certificate just visible in my hand. For a second, I hesitated, the phone screen showing my face back at me, pale and serious, and not at all the blushing bride anyone had probably pictured for me. This was not the fairy tale I had once wanted. It was something grittier, rawer, something I had forged from spite and necessity. I hit go live. "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the way my heart hammered in my ears. "Hey, Lily. Just wanted to share some news. I got married today." I smiled then, not sweet, not bashful, a razor-sharp smile that could cut through steel. "No Paris," I added, glancing up at the gray clouds rolling across the sky. "No Eiffel Tower. No violin music. Just me, the man I chose, and a future I'm building for myself." I ended the stream before the comments could start rolling in, before the phone could buzz with the inevitable flood of confusion, outrage, and betrayal. I handed it back to Nick, who pocketed it without a word, and we drove away from City Hall without looking back. In the quiet of the car, I let my head fall against the window, watching the blurred shapes of the city smear past, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a strange, wild kind of peace settle over me. Not the peace that comes from everything being perfect, because God knew nothing about this was perfect, but the kind that comes from finally choosing your own damn ending. They stole my fairy tale. They handed it to Lily, wrapped in a big glittering bow, and expected me to clap along from the sidelines like the good little understudy I had always been. But they forgot one important thing. I never needed their script to begin with. I could write my own damn ending. And this cold, clean, ruthless beginning was just the first page. The first call came less than 5 minutes after the live stream ended, and I did not even have to look at the screen to know it was my mother. Her name blinked there angrily, like an alarm, and for the first time in my life, I ignored it without hesitation, letting the ring-tone buzz itself into silence while the city rolled by outside the car windows. I leaned my head back against the cool leather seat, closing my eyes for a moment, bracing myself for the tidal wave I knew was coming, a storm that had been brewing for years and now finally had a reason to crash down. By the time we pulled into the underground garage of Nick's building, a sleek glass tower that looked like it had been carved straight out of the sky, my phone had blown up with missed calls and furious text messages. First from Barbara, then from Lily, then from aunts and cousins I had not heard from in months, all of them somehow believing they had earned a right to an explanation for my choices, as if I owed them even a sliver of myself after everything they had taken. I scrolled through them briefly, not out of guilt, but out of a dark curiosity, watching the messages shift from confusion to outrage to full-blown guilt trips in record time. How could you do this to us? You've embarrassed the family. This isn't you, Emma. Talk to us, please. And then Lily's messages, dripping with the sugary sweet poison she had always mastered so well, twisting herself into the victim even as she clutched her Paris proposal like a trophy. I don't understand why you're being so cruel. You didn't have to ruin everything. Why couldn't you just be happy for me? I tossed the phone onto the sleek granite counter of Nick's kitchen without answering, the sound echoing too loudly in the empty space, and realized with a strange hollow ache that whatever had been left of my family, whatever thin, frayed rope had been tying us together, had finally snapped. Nick watched me from across the room, leaning casually against the wall, hands tucked into his pockets, his expression unreadable as always. He said nothing, giving me the space to unravel if I needed to, but I stayed upright even though my insides felt like they were shaking loose from my spine. Feel good? He asked after a long moment, his voice light but not mocking, as if he genuinely wanted to know whether the taste of victory was as sweet as I had imagined. I laughed, a low, broken sound that tasted bitter on my tongue. I don't know, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty of it. It's like, I've finally got the upper hand, and all I can think about is how goddamn empty it feels. Nick pushed off the wall, crossing the space between us with that easy, predatory grace he wore like a second skin. He stopped just in front of me, not touching, just close enough that his presence filled up the space between my ribs and forced me to breathe a little deeper. Sometimes, he said, his voice low enough that it felt like a secret, the best revenge is just living the life they told you couldn't have. I looked up at him then, really looked, and for a flicker of a moment I saw something buried deep in his eyes, something colder, older, and more familiar than I wanted to admit. It was not just empathy he offered me. It was recognition, a mirror held up to my own broken places, as if he knew exactly what it meant to be underestimated, overlooked, told to wait quietly while others danced in the spotlight. And suddenly I wondered if Nick Vaughn had his own reasons for picking me out of the crowd that night at the gala, if this partnership he had offered was not just about needing an assistant or a business ally, but something deeper, something more dangerous. Maybe he saw in me a weapon he could sharpen. Or maybe, and this thought landed heavy in my gut, he saw a version of himself he could mold into something even sharper. Either way, the truth was, I didn't care. Not right now. Because for the first time in my life, I was not sitting on the sidelines, waiting for someone to call my name. I had thrown the match and burned the whole goddamn house down, and even if I was standing alone in the ashes, the cold air tasted better than the scraps they had always fed me before. Later, long after Nick had left me to settle into the guest room he had set up for me, a room bigger and cleaner than my entire apartment, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, phone silent beside me, the weight of my choices pressing down hard and real. I thought about Lily in Paris, getting her glittery proposal, her perfect pictures, her shallow little victory that would probably get 300 likes and 100 fake comments before it faded into the next shiny moment. I thought about my mother, sitting in her kitchen, telling anyone who would listen that she had no idea what went wrong, that she had always treated her daughters equally, that Emma had just changed. And I thought about myself, standing in that cracked marble lobby at City Hall, signing my name on a paper that tied me to a man I barely knew but somehow trusted more than the people who had raised me. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was freedom, and sometimes you had to fake the ceremony to claim the crown. I rolled over, pulling the heavy duvet up to my chin, and whispered the words into the darkness, just to hear them aloud. I'm not going back. The room stayed silent, but inside my chest, something finally settled, like the last piece of a puzzle snapping into place. Tomorrow, there would be more questions. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. But tonight, the fallout could wait. The morning after the fallout felt strange in the quietest ways, like the world had shifted a fraction of an inch to the left while I slept, and now everything looked just a little off if you stared long enough. Sunlight crept through the massive windows of the guest room, warm and golden and indifferent to the wars I had waged the day before. Somewhere below, I could hear the city humming back to life, car horns, the distant bark of a street vendor, the mechanical whine of a delivery truck reversing, all of it normal, all of it foreign now, like a language I had once spoken but no longer understood. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the phone I had tossed onto the nightstand the night before, half expecting it to light up with fresh messages, new demands, tearful apologies. But it was silent. The screen stayed black, as cold and blank as the space where my family used to be. Did I win? The question twisted itself around my thoughts like barbed wire, digging deeper the longer I let it sit there, and no matter how many times I tried to answer it, the words dissolved before they ever made it past my teeth. Winning had always been sold to me as a finish line, a glittering moment of triumph where the music swells and the credits roll, but real life had a way of screwing up neat little endings like that. There was no parade here, no clean victory to frame and hang above the mantle. There was only this quiet, aching thing inside me that tasted a little too much like grief to be satisfying. I took a shower, letting the hot water pound against my skin until I could almost believe it was washing away the guilt, the anger, the bone-deep sadness that kept trying to crawl back up my spine. I dressed carefully, choosing jeans and a soft black sweater that felt like armor without looking like it, and padded barefoot into the kitchen where Nick was already sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee and flipping lazily through the morning news on his tablet. He glanced up when he saw me, gave me a nod that somehow felt more respectful than any hug or empty consolation could have. He poured me a cup of coffee without asking, pushing it across the counter toward me like a peace offering, and I accepted it with a small, grateful nod. We didn't talk about the messages, the fallout, the broken pieces I had left behind. We didn't have to. It hung between us, thick and heavy, but strangely manageable, like carrying a boulder you had finally stopped pretending wasn't there. After a few minutes of quiet sipping and silence that somehow wasn't awkward, Nick set his tablet down and looked at me with a glint in his eye that immediately made my stomach twist. Not from fear, but from that dangerous kind of excitement that always seemed to follow him like a shadow. I have another offer for you, he said, and just like that, the fragile piece I had built around myself cracked again, spiderwebbing out in 100 directions. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my face neutral, but the truth was, I was already leaning forward before I even realized it, drawn in by the gravity he always seemed to generate when he wanted something. This one's bigger, he said, swirling the coffee in his cup thoughtfully. Riskier. But the payout, if you're willing to jump, it's life-changing. My throat went dry. I set down my mug carefully, feeling the tremor in my fingers and hating that he probably noticed it. What's the catch? I asked, because there's always a catch with men like Nick Vaughn, men who know how to wrap opportunities in velvet and glass and still hide the blade inside. He smiled, slow and almost predatory, like a wolf who sees you noticing the teeth and doesn't mind at all. You'd have to let go of who you were, he said. Completely. No looking back. No second guessing. You step into this, and you don't get to be Emma Carter anymore, not the way you were. It hit me harder than I expected, the weight of what he was really offering. Not just a job, not just an adventure, but a whole new self. A clean slate at a cost nobody could really measure until it was too late. I thought about my family, about the way my mother's voice had cracked when she realized she couldn't control me anymore, about the way Lily's perfect Instagram fairy tale would always have a crack running through it now. A jagged reminder that she wasn't the only daughter worth noticing. I thought about the life I had spent so many years trying to fit into the small, careful dreams, the polite smiles, the endless patience that had never bought me a damn thing but loneliness. And then I thought about the look in Nick's eyes when he said he needed someone like me, someone who could start fires instead of putting them out, someone who could stop asking permission and start taking whatever she wanted. "You don't have to decide today," Nick said, standing and grabbing his jacket off the back of the chair. "Take your time. But if you're serious about leaving the ashes behind, if you're serious about building something bigger, you know how to find me." He left then, the door swinging quietly shut behind him, leaving me alone in the massive, unfamiliar apartment with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock the only sounds for company. I sat there for a long time, staring at the doorway he had just disappeared through, feeling the question hang there in the room, bigger and heavier than anything I had carried before. Did I win? Or was this just the first step into a deeper, darker kind of game where the stakes were higher and the losses more permanent? The city stretched out beyond the glass windows, glittering and endless and utterly indifferent to whether I rose or fell. And somewhere deep inside me, past the bruises and the burns and the still bleeding cuts, I felt the flicker of something dangerous and hungry start to stir. Maybe I hadn't won yet. Maybe winning wasn't the point anymore. Maybe it never had been.